The concept of absolute and relative prices is a very, very important concept to understand when discussing economic decision making. Now, note that before we talked about opportunity cost, and opportunity cost being the opportunity foregone when one alternative is chosen over another, and how important opportunity cost is in determining our material living standards. Okay, now with this in mind, we can talk about absolute and relative prices and how decisions are made based on relative prices instead of absolute prices. Okay, so the absolute price of a good or service is, as the name suggests, it is the absolute or market price of that good or service. So let's take, for example, a car and a house. So the car would cost, on average, $25,000, and that's the price tag of the car. And let's say an average house costs $500,000 in the suburbs, and they're the absolute prices of these things. So the opportunity cost of buying a car, which costs $25,000, will be the next best alternative use of that $25,000. So you could use that $25,000 to purchase clothes, food, a holiday, whatever you want, whatever the next best alternative you feel that spending that $25,000 would be. Similarly, for a house, the opportunity cost of buying a house would be the next best alternative use of that $500,000. And they're the absolute prices. However, many economic decisions aren't made based on these absolute prices as such, but more so we concentrate on the relative prices. Now, the relative price is the price of one good or service compared with another. And in most cases, you can't express the price of one good or service compared with another, so we're going to do this in a ratio form. Right? Okay, so in this case, the relative price of a house to a car, in this case would be $500,000 over $25,000. And that would be around 20. So for every car you purchase, for every house you purchase, you would be able to buy 20 of that same car. So the relative price of that car, or that house to that car, would be 20 units. So let's take the example or the situation if the car actually increases in price to $30,000 and the house decreases in price to $300,000, for example. This obviously isn't a very realistic representation, but for the purposes of this example and to emphasize the point of relative prices, we will use these changes as such. Okay, so now we know that the car has appreciated to $30,000 and the house now has depreciated to $300,000. So how would this affect economic decision making? Well, first of all, we can see that the price of the car is still significantly less than the price of the house. So the house is still 10 times more expensive than the car. So the relative price now of the car to the house, the relative price of the house to the car would be 10, which is worked out by dividing 300,000 over 30,000. And now we can see that the relative price of the house has in fact decreased double the amount that it was before when it was at 20. And this is a very powerful tool in economic decision making because people will tend not to buy the car in this instance, but they will tend to reallocate resources or reallocate their money to the purchase of the house. And that is because the relative price has decreased. As you can see, they are now saving $200,000 as opposed to before when we didn't save anything at all. So now there is a saving of $200,000. But if we bought the car, we would have to spend a $5,000 extra to purchase the car. So now, even though we can see that even though the house is still significantly more than the car, we will be more likely to purchase the house instead of the car because the relative price of the house has decreased with respect to the car. Even though the absolute price, so note the absolute price, has not decreased at all at the moment. So therefore, in conclusion, economic choices are based on relative prices, and I cannot stress this enough. So relative prices are what economists base their decisions on, and what households and businesses and rational economic agents base their decisions on, rather than the absolute price of goods and services.